We're made for each other, the Prime Minister told German Chancellor Angela Merkel today as the two countries stepped up the momentum in the relationship. The Prime Minister is currently on a visit to Germany. In fact, he would have reached Spain a little while ago. He is on a four-nation tour in Europe for this entire week, largely looking at trade, investment and boosting economic cooperation. But terrorism is also a key issue that's being discussed with various countries. The visit to Germany, though, became even more significant because just days earlier, Angela Merkel had said that Europe would no longer depend on the US, and it's something that she repeated to the German media and to the international press today after her interaction with Mr. Modi.
We are made for each other.
Prime Minister Modi and German Chancellor Angela Merkel signalling a new momentum in ties as both countries signed 12 agreements in Berlin. The agreements covered everything from cybercrime to railway safety to an annual $1.1 billion in German aid for India, particularly in the area of sustainable urban development. This was the fourth round of the intergovernmental dialogue and is particularly significant, coming just days after Merkel questioned the future of ties with the US under Donald Trump.
India has always proved to be a reliable partner, but I think it's fair to say that we have been able to further deepen cooperation.
Earlier, Prime Minister Modi was given a ceremonial welcome with military honours. His 6-day trip to Europe is largely focused on trade and investment. Germany is the largest trading partner for India in the EU, with bilateral trade valued at nearly $20 billion, which is why the Prime Minister made a strong pitch for more investment.
Our emphasis has been on reducing government and enhancing governance.
Significantly, Reuters, quoting a source, reported that Prime Minister Modi told Merkel that India would stay in the Paris Climate Accord even if the United States pulled out. Trump is due to announce a decision this week. The Prime Minister indicated in his public comments that India would stick to its commitments.
हमारी जिम्मेवारी है कि हमारी भावी पीढ़ी के भविष्य के साथ खिलवाड़ करने का हमें हक नहीं है. ये हमारा कन्विक्शन होना चाहिए.
The day also had a surprise in store. Actress Priyanka Chopra happened to be staying at the same hotel as the Prime Minister in town for promoting her new film Baywatch. The Prime Minister met her, with Priyanka taking to social media with the photos. Bureau Report, NDTV.
Well, quite an interesting visit to Europe there. Priyanka Chopra has a last-minute surprise thrown in. Well, joining us on the program tonight, Dr. Samir Saran, the Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation here in the studio with us, Jyoti Malhotra, Consulting Editor of the Indian Express, Mr. G. Parthasarathy, former diplomat. Mr. Parthasarathy has a big smile on his face. I'll ask him why in just a moment. Amy Kasman, the South Asia Bureau Chief of the Financial Times, also with us tonight. Mr. Parthasarathy, let me ask you first. Normally, an Indian Prime Minister's visit to Europe doesn't make the kind of headlines that, say, a visit to the US or certainly in India-Pakistan meetings do, or China. But why is it that this particular trip you think is so important at this time?
First, you asked me why the smile.
Yes, please.
I said, what a day from Angela Merkel to Priyanka Chopra. Now, coming to the more serious aspects of it, don't forget Germany is about the only country in the world other than Japan which gives us huge concessional aid. $1 billion is not a small sum. Secondly, we are finding that Germany now, like Japan, is asserting greater independence of action, willing to take on the US and others. It's been very tough on the British on Brexit. With us, we must remember they look at us as being the country which, well, according to the Financial Times, has been the largest recipient of FDI in the world. They'd like to be a part of that. But the important thing is politically, I think there is disenchantment with America. There is in the mind of Angela Merkel and most Europeans, and notably the Germans. And I think if you are going to see a greater interest in the Indian Ocean region by Germany, because this conveys, is a part of their oil supply routes. So much to cooperate with India strategically and in a multipolar world. Don't forget, India, Germany and Japan support each other mutually and have remained steadfast friends in attaining permanent membership of the Security Council.
Yeah,
so
that's
yes,
right.
A lot in common, and German industry is amongst the best in the world. Investment always welcome.
Well, Samir, let me ask you that at this time, when you clearly see that Angela Merkel is looking to distance herself from the US and Germany from the US, is it far-fetched to think of India as an alternative to that? Because we're not as strong an economy, for instance, as the US is. Where would India fit into the picture as an alternative then?
Nidhi, India may not be ready to be a replacement for the US at this moment. But as we move from, say, 2.5 trillion of a GDP that we are today to, say, we add another 7.5 trillion in the next 15 to 17 years, it offers Germany immense scope of partnership. So as our journey moves from 2.5 trillion to 10 trillion of GDP, Germany sees immense opportunity in the India story. But more importantly, I think Ambassador Partha Sarathy got it right. I think the mood globally essentially forces the two leaders, both Prime Minister Modi and Angela Merkel, who actually see themselves as the defenders of the liberal system that exists today. Both of them actually see themselves as for the liberal trading regime, for an open trading system. And very few people are invested in that system anymore. India needs an open trading system as it moves its people out of misery and poverty. So both of them in many ways see a common mood in their two countries for furthering the trade agenda, for strengthening economic partnership. And of course, we cannot also dismiss the fact that this Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister, for the first time is as committed as the German Chancellor on issues like climate change and some of the global common issues around sustainable development goals. So I think there is a huge common framework for them besides trade, terrorism and investments. Which obviously speak for themselves.
The other interesting factor, though, Jyoti, would be the China factor. In fact, the Chinese premier is going to be in Germany literally hours after Prime Minister Modi has left. I think their talks are tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Germany has also been very cautious on the One Belt, One Road, even though they did send somebody for the OBOR summit. They have asked for greater transparency on that. How do you see that playing out, the whole Germany, India, China equation? Do you think, how will China balance that out? How is that going to play out?
Nidhi, you're absolutely right. I think one big aspect of Prime Minister Modi's visit, I mean, Samir and both Partha talked about the disenchantment with the US, and both on the part of Germany as well as on the part of India. Now, I think on India's side, Prime Minister Modi and the Foreign Office have tried very hard to get some love out of US President Donald Trump. That hasn't happened yet, although I think the PM will make a trip to Washington, D.C. sooner than later.
Probably in the end of June.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think because the Americans haven't responded as positively, India needs a reliable ally, a suitable ally, if you like. Germany, I think it's high time that the Indians have started looking at Germany and looking at it so intimately, and I think really, for even though even if Germany is sort of like a second, you know, if India is sort of disillusioned by the Americans, very, very upset or disillusioned with the Chinese, and even if that's the truth, the fact that both India and Germany are not as circumspect, are not as happy about China's huge global ambitions on the Belt and Road, brings them together. Having said that, like you said, Germany is going to receive Angela Merkel is going to receive Xi Jinping.
No, I think it's Li Keqiang,
If it's and both, there is no question that Germany and China also have a very big relationship.
Exactly.
So Germany cannot ignore the Chinese. Now, if India wants to offer an alternative to China's view of the world, I think that's also possible. And in that sense, I think that's how Germany becomes an even more important ally. Remember that Donald Trump is increasingly reaching out to the Chinese. He has said, the Americans have said that they will not receive the Dalai Lama or not give him the status that Obama gave the Dalai Lama. So in that sense, we see the Trump government, the Trump administration, being much more kosher with the Chinese than you had previously.
It's interesting, and I just want to ask Amy, this whole thing of how Donald Trump has really managed to piss off the Europeans, for want of a better word, after this G7 summit. You know, A, tell us about how that's playing out, and B, I think as Jyoti was saying, do you believe Donald Trump is an unreliable ally for India or for anybody?
Look, obviously summits like the G7 are all about diplomacy, and I think it's quite clear that Donald Trump is anything but diplomatic. He says what comes into his mind, and what may come into his mind at 1 minute may not be what comes into his mind 2 days later. So, in fact, I think there's no kind of core principles. I mean, it's been repeatedly said in Washington that Donald Trump is very influenced by the last person that he spoke to. So I think there is an issue of reliability. I don't think he necessarily, I mean, obviously he heavily courted the Indian-American vote during the elections and tried to kind of emphasize.
He loves Hindu.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think what he said and, you know, who he was appealing to was very well established and is widely known here. But I mean, I don't think he necessarily is completely preoccupied with India, or that it figures even very highly in his kind of vision of what it is that he wants to do. I mean, neither does he see India as a particular problem for him, but neither does he see it as offering. It's just not really that heavy in his consciousness.
Clearly, I think I am not convinced that the Donald Trump presidency will be bad for India. I think like
will it be indifferent to India?
No, I'm quite certain that it will follow the same linear path, which is that like every US president, the first year will be spent in trying to find a new balance with China, and thereafter they will turn to India and others to try and balance China. So in a sense, it is going to follow that linear path where every president believes, like in India, every prime minister believes he'll solve the Pakistan problem, and then it's business as usual. But I think what is important at this time is that the Indian Prime Minister will be now, after his European sojourn, will be moving to the SCO meeting, where he will meet the Chinese colleagues, the Russian
and maybe Nawaz Sharif
and Nawaz Sharif and others. So I think what this particular trip will also do for India is to start thinking about the kind of support they can elicit for an India proposition, for an India trade corridor, for an India economic proposal for the region. So, I mean, if you really want to make Chabahar something viable, you're not going to do it alone.
That's what Jyoti was talking about, offering the world an alternative.
Alternatives. Now, that alternative will require partners. And I do not believe that you can have a plan that goes through Central Asia and the Middle East, which will not have a strong European interest.
But you know what's also interesting, Ambassador Parthasarathy, today is, and I see this being reported widely in the international media today, for instance, that Reuters story on the climate change accord, the Prime Minister was asked at the press interaction directly that question, and he gave fair indications that India would not move away from its commitments to the Paris Accord. That's really being lauded in the international media at a time when Trump is coming under increasing criticism. Do you see more and more convergence, on key issues between India and Europe now? This being an example of that. Mr. Parthasarathy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Well, let me put it this way. With the major powers in Europe, yes. With France and Germany, yes. These smaller powers we find are too intrusive, and we get into petty differences. So yes, with the major powers of Europe, we have much to do. They are friends. Do you know that Germany and France backed us during the 71 conflict in Bangladesh? So I think they'd also take an independent path. And coming to what you spoke about earlier, Nidhi, I think his going to Russia after this is very important, because if first the Europeans are very skeptical and opposed to the Chinese OBOR. They did that in Beijing, and their high representatives have said so in public. But we have to come out with alternatives. And I think in Russia, we should revive the corridors from Bandar Abbas and Chabahar to Afghanistan and to Russia, across the Caspian. So there's no point in opposing everything China does and doing nothing ourselves. And I think we should be more imaginative of going to the BRICS Bank or to the Infrastructure Development Bank and becoming a player. And I think this time when the Prime Minister is there, some Indian ideas on communications and connectivity will come up, which is important. But more importantly now, I think we are heading towards a bit of uneasiness in Russia with the OBOR. Russian academics have objected to it. maybe if they get some space from Trump, there will be a better relationship. And I agree that, don't write off the relationship with Trump. There is a very large bipartisan support for that relationship. Within the diplomatic and military establishment, they realize we are very important. And any feelings he may have towards China and Pakistan will wane away between the Japanese,
what you
Indians
said on
and
Russia
others.
is particularly
and
interesting.
let's not forget Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, I just want to ask Jyoti on this thing that
Russia is an important.
Yeah, sorry, so just one moment on this, on the whole thing about Russia. Is that then perhaps a natural move for India to fall back on the traditional ally?
Well, it is a multipolar world, and I think that's one of the things that Modi hopefully has now come to terms with. Although for a long time the Americans were sort of flirting with the Indians were flirting with the US, which is fine. America remains, despite Donald Trump, the most powerful country in the world. Now, having said that, there is some tension between Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. You remember last year in Goa that both leaders, that there was sort of some discomfort between the two. I think the Indians also believe that Russia is moving towards the Chinese. And there is some truth to that. There is an increasing sort of Chinese collaboration with the Russians. But I think you cannot write off that relationship, which I think the New Delhi perhaps on and off.
I don't think it has.
It hasn't. It's far too important a relationship. Partha knows it very well. It's not, and by the way, it's not only a defense relationship. Of course, that's the underpinning of it. But having said that, I think it's an old ally. It's a reliable ally. Dmitry Rogozin, the Russian leader, was in Delhi recently. Modi gave him dinner. Not many people know that. They had very frank talks with the National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval. So there is some comfort with the Russians. But I think both Modi and Putin need to revive that comfort. And and
it's interesting, Amy, how Donald Trump has managed to sort of as we come to a close, sort of got everybody talking about old equations and new ones. But I just want to ask on the issue of the One Belt, One Road. There has even been divided opinion on that, whether India should have stayed away from that meeting. What's your view? I mean, did India shoot itself in the foot by being sort of the odd man out at the table, or was it a good principled stand that had to be taken?
I don't know that staying away from the meeting was really the best thing to have done. I think that, if you have concerns about the way that it's, being rolled out, that perhaps better would have been to be there at the forum, at the table, with the other countries that were there, finding those that shared your concerns, everybody, and kind of getting, networking and trying to really try to basically find the allies who share the Europeans were there, although they have concerns. So maybe it would have been better for India to be there and kind of form a group within the conference where these concerns are given a better airing, and not just by India alone, but with other countries that share these concerns, and what are the principles on which this OBOR projects are going to go through. And I think maybe there was more to be gained by being there, even if they weren't completely comfortable.
So maybe there's some truth in that.
I think there was nothing.
You have the might of China and the kind of money that they're throwing behind this entire project. What can India offer as an alternative, just even
so let me answer that.
An idea.
Let me quickly respond to Amy. I think there was very little for India to be gained by being at that conference. So I don't think we want to be reduced to creating caucuses opposing Chinese propositions from within. That is not the job of a country which represents 1/6 of humanity. And certainly there was nothing on the table that was so desirable for us to obtain by going to that conference. But I agree with her. I think India's challenge in the days ahead is to create the India alternative. I think the North-South corridor could be the basis. Can we come up with a plan where we can integrate the global efforts to revive trade, to revive connectivity, to revive economic investments around an India economic proposition. I think that's our challenge. In the next 1 year, we should be able to put forward some sensible, practical and pragmatic propositions before Europe. That's why this trip is important, before Russia, so that they have they can get out of the clutch of monopsony that they find themselves in. China is the only alternative. They don't like it, and certainly they don't want to be glorified, as Ambassador Parthasarathy mentioned. Many of them believe that they've been reduced to glorified policemen for Chinese economic projects. So in many ways, if we can come up with a sensible proposition, we can certainly interest the Europeans in it, and believe you me, at some point Washington DC will want to be a part of that as well.
So let me give
sooner rather than
last
later.
word to Jyoti. Is Europe the one bright spot, you think, or the encouraging spot in the India international story today, the diplomatic story? The neighborhood, not so much right now.
I mean, unfortunately, I think I do agree with you. Modi keeps talking about India's neighborhood first policy, but unfortunately that's not, we don't see that.
Not entirely his fault though. Not like he didn't try.
No, absolutely. He did try very hard. But it is, he went to Raiwind, he went for Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding, he's done the Nepal trip 3 times. But it seems that India is changing its policies yet again in Nepal. He had a good trip to Sri Lanka. So yes, I think Europe looks good right now. But quickly, just to talk on the China thing, I think, as Chinese sort of master strategists like Sun Tzu said, you have to know your enemy. So therefore, you have to, if you want to know your enemy, in this case, if this is what the Indians believe that this is what China is, then go to the Belt and Road Summit.
We should have gone.
We should have gone at whatever level. It needn't have been a joint secretary from the Foreign Office. It could have been the ambassador. It could have been a junior functionary from the embassy. Go there. You have to just smile sweetly. After all, that's what Deng Xiaoping said. He said you have to smile sweetly, keep a low profile and learn about what's happening in the rest of the world, and this includes China.
Well, I would ask you to invite China to a Taiwan conference in a third country.
And watch them smile.
No, but look at
nor his father would have gone to a conference that would have discussed any of the fundamental sovereign issues that bother China. And I think this was an issue of territoriality, and I think
and sovereignty. Well, like I said, the opinion divided on that, but it's been fascinating to talk to all of you on the Prime Minister's visit to Europe. I think on other channels there must be flames coming up everywhere, everyone yelling at each other, and here we've been able to have a sane, good discussion on an important issue. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow night. The GDP numbers are going to be out tomorrow. That's going to be important. We'll look at that tomorrow night. See you then.